In this video, we're going to talk about the shapes, planes, and cavities of the animal body. So first, let's do a quick review of the different types of symmetry that are associated with animal bodies. And this was covered in a previous lesson. So first of all, some organisms are asymmetrical, and this is primarily associated with the parazoa, also known as the phylum Porifera, which are the sponges. Other animals have radial symmetry, which means that they have a top and a bottom. But then the other structures just kind of surround it. And so you can essentially cut it in these different sections and end up with kind of mirror image parts. Examples of organisms with radial symmetry include the cnidaria, so the jellies, the echinoderms, such as the sea stars and sea urchins. And then bilateral symmetry is typically found in things like arthropods and the different worms, and of course, vertebrates here. And bilateral symmetry just means that you basically have a left and a right part. So left and right sides. So now we'll take a look at the different body planes, or sometimes these are referred to as sections. And these are kind of like artificial cuts through the body. So we're not going around chopping up bodies, hopefully. But this concept kind of applies whenever someone's maybe doing surgery or dissecting an animal, or it also relates to medical imaging. So in vertebrate animals, we have these different planes. So first of all, we have the sagittal plane, which just divides the body into left and right parts. And I'm going to focus on the human over here first, and then we'll talk about what's going on with this goat. So the sagittal plane is, you can actually see the mid-sagittal plane here, but a sagittal plane is anything that is going to divide the organism into left and right parts. Now the mid-sagittal plane produces equal right and left halves. So sagittal would be anywhere kind of along that same plane, but mid-sagittal is specifically right in the middle, which would divide the organism into left and right parts. The frontal or coronal plane divides the body into front and back parts. So you can see that in this plane, we've got the front of the human here, and then the back here. And the transverse plane is also known as a cross-section, and you can see that right here. And it's going to divide the body into a top and a bottom part, or an upper and lower part. Now with tetrapods, like this goat here, it might seem a little harder to kind of understand that, but think about if this goat were standing up on 2 feet. So if we were to essentially take this picture of a goat and rotate it 90 degrees to the right, then it would match up what we see in the human. Vertebrate animals also have body cavities, and this is associated with the coelom. So we'll take a look at this human here and take a look at her body cavities. So there are 2 main cavities. There's the dorsal cavity and the ventral cavity. The dorsal cavity is further divided into the cranial cavity and the spinal cavity. The ventral cavity is further divided into the thoracic cavity, which is the chest, and the abdominopelvic cavity. And then the abdominopelvic cavity is further divided into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. So we kind of have cavities and cavities and cavities. And these cavities are where a lot of the major organs are found. So, for example, the cranial cavity is where we have the brain. Spinal cavity would be the spinal cord. The thoracic cavity is where we find the heart and lungs, as well as some of the other organs like the trachea and esophagus, etc., etc. The abdominopelvic cavity, as we mentioned, is further divided into the abdominal cavity and the pelvic cavity. The abdominal cavity is where we find the majority of the digestive organs. So things like the stomach and intestines. And then the pelvic cavity is where we find the reproductive organs.